Hey, everybody, this is John Chapman with The Challenge. I want to welcome you tonight to our first ever post presidential debate analysis that's going on. And right now, I feel like a little bit when the family gets around the table, there's a bunch of food in the middle, and everybody's looking forward to that meal and all this information. But I got to tell you what, the thing that has to happen first is man, we got to grab hands and we need to pray because I just watched this debate, and I'm actually going to start. I'm going to get to some thoughts that I had here. I've been notating on some of the things that were said. But the first thing I must do is read Psalm 67, because here at the Challenge, we're always talking about bringing both religion and politics to the table. And tonight was all politics. But the truth of the matter is, God plays a huge role in this too. And I'm not kidding when I say this. When I saw both the candidates out there, I found this scripture, and I'm actually going to read this because this is what I ultimately am thinking right at the moment when I see the options that we have, not the politics that I lean with, but the options that we have in this leadership. So this is the psalm that came to mind, and Psalm 67 said, "Oh God, be gracious to us and bless us, and cause your face to shine upon us, that we can know your ways on the earth, Lord, and your salvation among the nations, that the peoples would praise you, and that the nations would be glad. For you judge truly with uprightness, and you guide the nations on the earth." So I read this scripture, and I'm like, look, if you don't, I, I am I had this thought hit me, and as I get into this analysis, and I saw both presidential candidates there. First of all, the current president, and then the former president. I want to tell people what my opinion is. First of all, on voting at all. As a Christian man, I believe that I have some moral responsibility to get involved in a vote. And I've if you're like me, you've kind of warred back and forth. I've met some people. There was a time when I was like, no, if I'm not. It's not my responsibility to vote. And other times I was really hardcore, like, nope, it's everybody's responsibility to vote. And I'm trying to find where that line is, where my conscience is at rest, my spirit is at rest, where I can still vote and still be okay with why I voted. Because I don't want to align myself or Christ who has died for me with a candidate, but I want to walk uprightly and integrity when I do make my vote. And after watching both of the candidates, I just have to say, when you go to the polls and you vote, trust in the Lord, not in your vote. I hope that makes sense to you. It's made sense to me for the last several days. That has hit my mind even before this presidential debate came up. And it's not that it wasn't a worthless debate, but I have to say the first thing I realized when both these gentlemen took the stage is this has to be the most geriatric debate, presidential elective debate in the history of the United States. Now, I have not been digging in my history, but as I saw both of these gentlemen walk out there, I and I'm still a little bit overwhelmed, to be honest with you, just because, and this is just my personal opinion. I I thought Joe Biden was gonna be even a little peppier. Like, I thought that, maybe there had been enough news media that was really exaggerating his condition, and I say this, respectfully, not against the president, it's, at all, but I have to say, he is not well. And my heart was breaking because I'm not sure at what level this is not fair to President Joe Biden. I don't know what level governmentally that's even fair to have somebody come out and struggle in the way that he did with his age. It was heartbreaking. Every time he opened his mouth, it was heartbreaking. And it wasn't really a debate. It was just getting to see the candidates. I didn't see anything about this that caused me to think the United States, on the whole, is in a great position, because even the things that were debated didn't necessarily talk about any kind of a good position that we're in overall. I mean, when you really think it when you see the whole picture of where our economy is, can we really even have a debate about our economy and who's gonna bring that back and how that's gonna happen, and how can blame shift those things back and forth from one president to the next? Because all of the information that is being stated is true and twisted in some way in many levels. And so when they got into the debate, some of the first questions that happened, and kudos to the commentators, to be honest with you, I really thought it can be more biased. I don't. I think they hit some questions that were important to a lot of people, but in the end, there's also a lot of questions that were not being brought forth that I think would have been impacted what you and I believe and think also. But yeah, I thought it was, neither here nor there. It was relatively decent as far as the questioning that was going on. They were bringing up the economy first, and at the early part of it, they were bringing up the economy in regards to this. And I want to, and I'm going to bring into this because they brought into the debt load later into the debate. They brought in the debt and who was responsible for that. And I've been doing some research before the debate tonight in regards to that. And what is interesting to me is what I discovered was there's a nonpartisan group that equally checks the debt that's brought on by a president or agreed upon economically by a president, and then how much debt is also brought in to a presidency. And it could be from prior, not just the presidency prior, but multiple presidencies prior. Can because as policies fall off, new debt can be incurred because of those policies. And so when we're talking about economy and debt in the nation, when you see those things, you the first thing that struck me is, okay, so Trump actually did bring in more agreeable debt. So he actually authorized more debt during his presidency, about 8 billion in debt. And on the other hand, you had it admittedly they said in addition to that debt, um 7.8 billion was brought in from the prior presidency. And so you saw a large increase in the debt load there. And so when they're trying to shift blame off of that, and they say that Joe Biden has only brought forth about 4.8, 4.5 to 4.8 billion in agreeable debt, meaning policies that he signed into place for spending. That doesn't include what fallover debt will come from that. And we got a whole nother year to go. And so I find that very interesting. Those numbers are always skewable. They don't mean a whole lot in the whole picture, but you got to look at the macro on this because whether it's currently by Biden or President Trump, whoever's going to be in there next, we still got a growing debt. And so when they're trying to blame who the debt is on, to me, that's a moot point because the nation is not in a condition. That's why I read Psalm 67 before we started this. The nation is not in a condition to start to look to man to fix what's going on. We need to keep that in mind in regards to looking at these things. Um, Economically, it got a little bit old for me because the impact of what COVID had when they're talking about loss of jobs and gain of jobs, it's very obvious that when you ask the right questions and understand what was going on, every time Biden said to Trump, "You lost more jobs in the history of a presidency than any other." Of course, the self-imposed, self-induced COVID pandemic, aka not really a pandemic, came forth for the destruction of a presidency and an economy came in. As a result of that, those are where the jobs were lost. And then when Biden tried to claim that the jobs that he made more jobs than any other president at a record rate of speed, I think Trump rightly said that those were all rebound jobs. Those were people getting their jobs back and coming back into the job workforce. And yet, along with that, you have a 16, 17% cost increase, an inflationary increase that begins roughly year and a couple months into Biden's presidency. And so it's interesting that when we're having this conversation around economy, sometimes we very much so forget what was going on with COVID and the impact that that had. And I didn't necessarily agree with how much money was given to the U.S. people in the name of squelching our freedoms. Jobs that were lost, jobs that were threatened if we didn't get a shot. Nobody talked about the shot. If you noticed, that was disappointing to me. Nobody taught about the freedom about that. Although I take that back. It was touched on a little bit by former President Trump, that they both kind of went back and forth a little bit about how many people, how many Americans actually died as a result of the pandemic under whose presidency. And Trump said less died under his presidency. But in all honesty, he only had 1 year's worth of COVID, whereas Joe Biden had a couple years, technically, worth of COVID. But what numbers are not as a part of that, which I think are extremely important, is how many of those people didn't die of COVID itself, but died as a result of taking unproven science protection agency through a vaccine that's not a vaccine. And that's a serious issue. To me, this is they missed a very serious issue in this. And I was appreciative that President Trump said, they did not mandate it, that his presidency did not mandate that, and I would have to agree with that. Living through the pseudo pandemic, they didn't do a mandatory, although they didn't stop the fear that ran through the states either. I think he could have taken a much stronger stand on that, and I think more so than jobs during the pandemic, more so than economy going on with the pandemic. The bigger issues, the question that was not asked was the freedoms of the United States people. And so that was entirely missed, in my opinion, totally missed on what was a greater impact, what was going on. And so neither of them get kudos for me on that. Because when we're talking about, well, Trump did say, and again, I have to credit him a little bit with this, I guess, that he did credit, he was saying, we came with the vaccines, but what people were most disappointed in is that they were more concerned with their freedom with that. They were more disgruntled about when the mandate started to come forth through Joe Biden. And those questions were not asked. Because if you remember, Trump said, hey, we've pushed all this through and this is available. And when Joe Biden became president, and of course, 14 months later, our economy finishes not only tanking and flatlining, but it actually goes into a growth state. Not the economy itself, but our costs, our expenditures start growing exponentially right behind him threatening. Does anybody else remember watching President Joe Biden threaten the American people that if you didn't take the jab, you were going to be killing other people? And it was time to get serious about this. Nobody asked the question about Joe Biden, say, hey, do you remember when you threatened all of the US? And then at the same time, so that's something that they never brought up. And to me, that's a serious issue. And I think they're not meeting with Americans at all. I don't think they're meeting with you and I when they miss that concept at all. And yet they choose to bring up January 6th. And then they go, well, Trump, you incited this violence, which is yet to truly been proven. And I don't know if anybody's been paying attention to much of anything, but in regards to January 6th, that's been a fiasco. Trump didn't incite anything. And anybody who listened to Trump at all during his loss in the presidency, and he gave up that loss, he conceded that loss, and never did he incite by staying on board with his people and loving his supporters. And they're calling that incitement. I was reminded today on a different news article that Hillary Clinton never did concede in her loss. Hillary Clinton never conceded in her losses, and Hillary Clinton was never indicted for crimes she actually committed for overthrowing by hiding her emails, which is a felony. And so when you start taking a look at this information, we got to look at this stuff in the macro. We got to look at the bigger picture. And that was not touched on. And that was important for me. And I think that's important for you because bigger than the economy, which we've already thrown in the tank, the United States cannot recover in an economic debt format that it actually exists in. We might be able to work towards eliminating some, but it doesn't really happen, does it? We're always told, oh, we're going to cut the debt, and yet it keeps growing. So it doesn't really matter whether they're Democrats or Republicans. It's just a matter of how they're going to circulate the money while the debt continues to increase. So there's no real questions about the impact of that debt to us as a nation, which is a bigger question, I think, than the economy itself. And that question never really got hammered good. And then again, back to the COVID, because that's tied into the economics that's going on here. They never really talked about the fact that people were threatened. People were thrown in prisons. People were told that they couldn't come to their jobs. people, the shaming that was going on against people who said, "Nah, I don't want the shot because it is an experiment." Because I went to my local store and actually asked them to download the paperwork that talks about the drug, and actually, the paperwork itself says this is an experimental drug, not for the purpose of stopping transmission. And many people never did that. And this was not a question that was asked. All the freedoms that were lost, the tyrannical activity that was going on within the government, to actually see that occur. That was a huge miss, in my opinion, on CNN. Of course, that's going to be a miss. They're going to utilize that as a miss because now we're trying to get back to same old, same old. Now, immigration issue, and I did some research on this too. Um, and unfortunately, Joe Biden was not able to just be honest about this, and so he beat around the bush on all of the, in regards to all the illegal immigration that was going on. And again, this is an independent study that I looked up that showed the numeric numbers of what illegal immigration was going on both Trump's presidency and Biden's presidency. And I don't think I think Trump said what he was gonna say about it, which all statistically and factually comes in as true, although there's usually some sort of over exaggeration on the trauma over it, but that trauma is actually, it does exist. People really do get murdered by criminals when they come across the state. Whether they're emptying all their prisons or not, I don't know. I haven't done that research. But I will say this, Biden did nothing to defend himself when the facts play out that he, in fact, let me give you these numbers here just a second. Under the Biden administration and the Trump administration, so Trump's administration was 2016 to 2020. And in his administration, are you ready for this? He began, as we know, he began pushing for the wall. And I want you to know that my wife and I made a trip to the border ourselves in 20, let's say, was it 19? End of 19? 18? And we went down and we went to visit some friends and we actually got to see the wall that was being built. It was quite substantial. And even while we were right on the border, we saw people being arrested. We watched people being arrested up and down the border, um, illegally crossing down near McAllen, Texas. And I've done mission trips down in Texas, and you see the activity down there. And by the way, well, let me get to the numeric values of these anyway, because these are hard numbers in regards to this. And it's something that we do need to take seriously, the quantity of illegal immigration coming in. And Joe Biden said something that was very interesting, and I hope to touch on later in regards to illegal immigrants. So in 2016, there was roughly 300,000 illegal immigrants that came into the US. 300,000. That's a pretty low number in 16. And then a couple of years later in 20 by 2019, 800,000 had come in under the Trump administration. Excuse me, in 2019. That was the year of COVID. So I find that very interesting that in 2018, it was about 500,000. 2016, it was 300,000. But the year of COVID, when everybody was being threatened if they did not take the jab. Everybody was being warned. Everybody was being fear mongered in regards to what was going on. Even during the Trump administration, now we had 800,000 illegals pouring across the border during that time because our nation was in a weakened state. And I think that's worth noting. And so that's pretty fascinating. Now, when you get to the illegal immigrants in the Biden administration, it has more than doubled, it says, that actual amount. And so per year, over the course of the last 3 years, nearly, are you ready for this? In 2021 of his administration, 1.7 million. 1.7 million. So that was twice plus a tenth of percent. So not just the 800 million that came in during 2019, but 2 years later, just the year 2021, more than double that amount came in. Now, you can think what you want. That's not a mistake. When you literally bring in 1 million, bring in 1 million by turning your head, if you will, 1 million illegal immigrants only on their second year as president. And we have to understand this is a pretty serious impact. So over the last 3 years, it is stated in the statistic in this bipartisan statistician that took these marks here, nearly 20 million, so 18.5 million people total illegally have crossed the border over 3 years, and two of them, um, uh, nearly 2 million there each year after, illegal, and the rest have been kind of crashing down on the border. And so to come to, well, it's about closer to 18 million over the last 4 or 5 years, including the COVID year of Trump. That is roughly the size of New York. Okay, and being the fourth biggest in the nation, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people of impact. That's a lot of work to get a lot of people that it's not that we don't want them here, but there's a way to come here that would slow that process altogether for the sake and the safety of this nation. And we have seen that that has been one of the craziest things for me to see the increase of illegal immigration in this country. Um, rightly noted, I found that, and I'm going to get to the Social Security question they were asking Trump and Biden also. I found it very interesting, and I felt bad. I'm telling you, um, President Joe Biden has served his country, and it's just time to be done, I think. He was having a hard time formulating good quality sentences. He wants to think well, and I'm serious when I'm saying I'm not trying to speak against him. That was difficult to watch. You know, if that was your grandfather or your great grandfather who was up there like that, that's borderline abuse to me by the Democrat Party to actually have him in front of people and pushing him in the condition of his health for where he was at. He was making statements like this: we are going to save Social Security by increasing the economy of this nation. We have the fastest growing economy this past 2 years in the nation because of illegal immigrants. That's what he said. Illegal immigrants. That's what he said. He actually credited, and I'm sure it was a mistake. He credited illegal immigration. Actually, that's the truth. Because what goes up on the Capitol Hill is they want illegal immigration to come on because it does help bolster the economy because of the low rate cost it takes to get them hired. I so that's something we've all known, but Joe Biden just admitted that, as sad as it was. Now, I'm going to take a moment here to be a little critical of President Trump too. He's not young anymore. Did anybody else notice that? He's not a young fella anymore. He still seems to be very sharp. And my thought was too, when you have been through as much as he has at this point, with the felony trials that have gone on in New York City, I can't imagine trying to go through that and then being at a debate at this point. And this is an early debate. I think it was an early debate for two reasons. One, they were trying to get Trump off guard because of the felony charges, and they were trying to do it as soon as possible. This is earlier than usual debates. And I think they were trying to get as early as possible because I don't know how President Joe Biden is going to do a month from now or 2 months from now. So I think all of it was to benefit the current president and maybe make it a little bit harder for the former president to be involved in the debate. That's the only thing I could come up with for why they were doing that as early as they were. I don't think there was enough. There was some questions that came up in regards to security of our world climate right now, in regards to the Ukraine and Russia, and in regards to, I don't think near enough weight was put on the questioning for Israel and Hamas. And in these things, when we talk about the security of this nation, when CNN was promoting this, and if you catch our podcast from this last Wednesday, we were talking about this. When CNN was promoting this podcast, they were saying, very strongly, well, Trump is a felon. 30 sometimes he's a convicted felon. And then they said, and Joe Biden had a few slip ups. Well, when they started talking about the questions about what's going on globally right now, it is true that generally when a seated Republican president is in place, in power, there's very little warring going on. That is a general rule. And what I found, that's just when you look at it. Now, the Russian-Ukraine war has actually been going on. If you do a little bit of history search there, the war itself has been going on since 2014, officially, some type of war disagreement there. But the invasion of Russia came in 2022, which was year number 2 of Joe Biden's presidency, which along with that, you have to admit that Joe's son, who was involved in the Ukraine along with Joe for financial gain, we have spent over $800 billion to the Ukraine in this war. So I find it interesting that Joe Biden was accusing President Trump of being on the side of Putin when Putin didn't do anything, any sort of invading, not at any level against the Ukraine. But Putin did invade the Ukraine, at which point the US now has been pouring money into the Ukrainian war, and that is not finished. That started a long time ago, the invasion of 2022, but the war's been going on before that. So here we have a Democrat seated president, and I have to say, extreme violence has been going on in the Middle East. Upheaval has been there. Not enough weight was put on the questions to either the president of what was going on there. Although I do believe President Trump, in his stance in regards to the security of the world, security of our own nation, would do very well to come in and get those things ended. But we don't pay attention to that stuff. The news doesn't keep up with those. You got to go to some sort of conservative news media outlet to continue to see what's going on with Hamas. And when the question was asked in regards to how they were going to get that conflict stopped, um, President Biden said, and we talked about this two couple programs ago. We were talking about the G7 summit, and President Biden said that we are going to exercise the policies discussed at the G. That's how he's going to get the war to stop with Israel and Hamas. The policies discussed at the G7 summit. And if you watch the G7 summit when that happens, all that is talking and posturing. They can't do anything. There's nothing they can actually do to stop anything. And Joe Biden actually cited that as being what they were going to use to see that stopped, and that was going to be effective. Well, it's been since October 7th, and they still have hostages, and they still have American hostages. And that question wasn't asked, that there's American hostages still over there held by Hamas while this war is still going on. How come they didn't ask the question of Joe Biden about the upheaval and the uprising that's been going on the college campuses in this country that are anti-Semitic? How come that isn't a discussion that was going on? How come it's not a discussion of all the abject failures that's going on in this country as far as the economy goes, as far as the increase in the cost of living, the cost of food, the cost of gas? And how is it? To be honest with you, I was a little hurt when he said that the inflation is really hurting the black community. I got news for you, Joe. The inflation is hurting all of the community. It's hurting the entire community. And if we don't see the threads of tyrannical idealism that's going on in the presidency, the current presidency, who also stated that every repair he was going to do, be it Social Security or an increase to help release the burden for the middle class, is he's going to go after the trillionaires. He said, I'm going to go after the trillionaires. I'm going to go after the trillionaires. Well, when are we going to wake up as a culture and go, you know what? Communism is banking on getting as much money as possible from the people that own and operate and run the most to distribute that. And when he keeps saying, we're just going to keep raising taxes, we're going to go after the trillionaires and pay their fair share. Look, I am an independent businessman. I am small, independent, one employee myself. And I pay a tremendous amount in taxes. And my business has only ever seen its truest flourishment when it was under the Trump administration. It flourished immensely. It saw incredible growth. And so when Joe Biden says under the President Trump administration, he really hammered with taxes the middle class. I am the middle class. I'm an independent employee, run my own business, and that is emphatically a lie. And it does actually bolster and increase all communities, no matter what race you are, to have job availability there. The COVID mockery, the pseudo COVID opportunity actually destroyed more potential for any minority or anybody who was wanting a job for years. And it's taken us years to recover from that because of the of what has happened. Joe could have said, "You know what? No pandemic. We're done." As a matter of fact, President Trump could have said, "This is not real, and this is not truly a pandemic, and this whole thing's a fiasco." And that would not have had the economic impact that it did. So there's a lot of accountability to be held by both of those presidencies, and seeing that once you are president doesn't mean you can do everything right. And apparently, nobody's interested in the broader scope picture that happened. That, as you can see, I'm cycling back to the whole COVID thing because it's a little hard to listen to these questions in regards to an economic state, what we're going to do to raise taxes, watch the inflation go up, and the inflation is just off the charts. The inflation is off the charts. If there's anybody that's hitting profoundly, it is us in middle class. The inflation is a tax. Okay, inflation itself is a tax, and if you're going to blame Trump for raising taxes on the middle class, that's an intentional lie to tell the middle class all this inflation of over the last 3 years, 16%. Are you to tell me this is not a tax against us? I'll show you my books. Folks, it is a tax against us. Well, it's just inflation. No, it's a tax. Inflation is getting more taxes into the federal government who have mismanaged the money for decades now. And we are trillions in debt. It's unrecoverable. These shouldn't be conversations we're having. They're still not asking all the right questions to what really matters in this country and the importance of what's going on. That is my thoughts on that, without question. Um, I'm checking a couple more things. I don't want to miss anything. I wrote down more notes listening to this debate than I took in college. I'm telling you, it was that easy to listen to what was going on in here, and see what was going on. I have to say too, Trump, he wasted too much time backpedaling on the question. So when the next question came forth, he wasted too much time defending himself instead of just getting right to the question and letting us know what he was going to do. And I was a little disappointed by that. Way too much backpedaling going on there. He needed to just say, "All right, here's the answer to the question." You don't have to defend yourself against something that you believe is a lie against you. The more you defend yourself, the more guilty you look. And he didn't need to keep backpedaling on some of those. Hey, I'm just going to make sure I'm going to let you know about this. You know what? I've just got to insist. If there was an error that was going on with President Trump that I thought was pretty big, again, with all respect to current President Joe Biden, whose health is obviously not well, that is not against him. It's just the truth. We want to pray for our leadership and his health. But if you have to defend against the things Joe Biden was saying, considering what Joe Biden was saying, you're wasting your time. You're wasting your time. Now, with that being said, Trump said it pretty well. They were wasting their time doing the debate. There was things that they should really be doing. But Trump did waste a fair amount of time just defending himself when the statements of President Biden were so ludicrous. I mean, when you start every single rebuttal against former President Trump by saying, "Oh, everything he's just saying, it's just ludicrous. Everything he's just saying, it's just crazy. Oh, anybody who would say that, that's just absolutely insane. That's just everything he's saying. It's just ridiculous." He started every answer of rebuttal against Trump by saying that, "Oh, that's just stupid. That's just ridiculous." That's what he said. And you've debunked yourself already, right? You're not legitimate in the debate if you start your rebuttal or argument back against what Trump has already said. If you state that, you're already missing out on something. And Trump would take the bait. And so when the next question would come, he'd waste time going back to what President Joe Biden said when that time didn't need to be wasted. It's obvious. If you can't see that, I think you should be concentrating on maintaining the supporters you have, not trying to get new supporters. Because I think people have pretty much made up their mind in regards to this. And the only question that you have, though, is you got two presidents that I hope, and groups like CNN and I hope Fox and whatever future president debates happen, which have become really just more of an entertainment thing because nobody's really talking about the issues that this country needs to see changed. and I'm going to point back to the key ones, which is the tyrannical rule of this country. And somebody needs to ask the question, who's going to be the president that's going to be brave enough to stand up and say, all the power back to the people? And we're not going to try to run on more governance. Well, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. We need to be we've long passed the threshold on that, and they didn't dig deep enough on those questions to put both of them on their heels to find out who's going to stop the tyranny because it's going on. Who's going to stop the tyranny? Absolutely. These are the questions that need to happen. There was a question that was asked um, in regards to, because Biden had been talking about to vote for Trump is going to be a vote against democracy. And so that question was posed to Biden. And in posing that to Biden, he agreed that yes, to vote for Trump is a vote against democracy. Now, this has been something that President Biden has been saying for some years. This has been something that politicians will say. If you vote for the other person, you are anti-democracy. You are coming against our democracy. If you vote for that person, you're stealing our democracy. I'm gonna give you the truth on this. Your democracy has been being stolen for a very, very long time. And the reason it is that we believe we're saving our democracy by voting for somebody. And that is a false premise to vote. If you believe we're saving our democracy by voting for somebody, you're actually giving up democracy by believing in a ruler. Democracy is by the people, of the people, for the people. So we need to not put our faith in any individual but the Lord God Himself. But trust that when you vote, God is the one who's going to bring the judgments to these lands, and He is the one who's going to bring any amount of productivity into this country. We must turn to the Lord as a country. Tonight's debate revealed that, in my estimation, greater than ever. It is an interesting time in history that we are, I guess, getting to live in. And I am not going to be the guy that says, I'm not going to lie to you. I used to think we could make America great. Now, I just think we're going to have to learn how to sink gracefully. And I'm praying that in whatever graceful manner that actually occurs, because watching a debate like this causes me to believe and better understand more and more of what's going on at the government level. We have relinquished too much authority. We have relinquished too much power to all of these elected officials. We, as God-fearing people, have begun to believe too much in people and not believe and trust enough in the one who has created people. And that is where we will always have to turn to see things come to where they need to be in regards to this. Now, I'm not going to lie, I'm conservative fundamentally. I'm biblically solid to the core. When you see these things, I've got complaints about either of the candidates. They are the two oldest candidates I've ever seen in front of me ever in my life. Sometimes that connotates wisdom. But tonight I just saw, well, I think they both thought, if you watched it, at one point they thought that they could just wrap this up and they could find out who was the better president based on how they played golf. That literally came up. Trump started talking about winning golf tournaments and accusing Joe of not being able to drive the ball 50 yards. I've never golfed a day in my life. And I sat back and I stared at the screen and I thought, what in the world are we talking about right now? What in the world does this have to do with the power and the limitations that have been placed over the American people? What in the world does golfing have to do, whether it be 50 yards or 2 tournaments worth, as being a better person when we all see what's going on around us and the farce of all the things that are going on around us? When you have 16% inflation over the last 3 years, when you have over 20 million illegals coming in and having a massive impact and influence on this country, all the while we're pretending as if we are one solid group of people with one thought, and we are not. And I believe the separations are going to start to come. And I think this is only an emphasis of this. I don't know who's going to win this presidential election come November 5th, but I can say this. I think people are onto it. I've been onto it for some time, and I believe more of you are onto this too. And perhaps it is us that need to come up with the talking points of what this nation needs. Perhaps one of those presidents needs to stand up and read Psalm 67, as I have before I started talking on this podcast today. Perhaps every president should stand up and begin quoting from the scriptures. Perhaps we as a people do need to actually turn towards God instead of just talk about it or say like it's a last resort. You know how sometimes we do that? We go, "Oh my gosh, only God can fix this thing." I want to tell you something. Only God does exactly what he wants because he's sovereign. I don't know if it's going to get fixed, but I want to do the part that God has for me. And I hope you grow to do the part that God has for you. And I would encourage us not to get caught up in the foolish questions, many of which happened tonight, because we can all look at that and go, well, that's not true about Trump, or that's not true about Biden, or that's true what Biden said about Trump, or that's true what Trump said about Biden. That's not what I'm voting for. That's not where I'm putting my trust. And so when we see this debate tonight, you need to consider some things. Are you going to follow the rhetoric, or are you going to hunker down and take a larger picture of what's going on in this country? Because I'm not sure either of these fellas is going to give us back all of the authority that the Constitution states that we actually have. There is a undercurrent within the people of this country, and I believe there's going to be an overflow that's actually going to bring some sort of unity to this country within the people that see and understand that this is no longer about a unification of a country that is built on some sort of party get alongness, because that's long been swept under the rug. That's long been pushed out of the house, and that has long been flushed down a river. Nobody's concerned about the things we need to be concerned about. And good God fearing people, people who've come to the cross and experienced the grace of Jesus Christ, people who believe that there's going to be a day of judgment. And by the way, there is. People who understand eternity is where lives actually go. This is where the policies need to be built from for the lives of each generation. With that in mind, when you talk about, I'm going to pick on one more thing, just so you know where I stand on this, by the way. Trump was first asked the question that if voted again into office, would he do anything about the greenhouse effect, the destruction that's coming from the new intense heat and water table oceans that are rising in this country. A fear mongering story that I was told in the late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, all of which guaranteed absolute destruction to this planet that was supposed to happen 15, 20 years ago. When are they going to get called out on that lie? And it's a lie, an untrue presupposition that when you say, hey, when you become president, what are you going to do to fix this? Well, first of all, it's unsubstantiated. And if we're asking questions about science that cannot be confirmed because nobody's lived long enough to actually prove any of that is going to be a destructive force to this planet, folks, that is a different kind of religion. That is a religion of the planet. That is a religion of worshiping the life of the planet. The Bible is very specific that what happens to people when they begin to worship the creation instead of worshiping the creator. In Romans, everything we see going on in our nation is a result of that. LGBTQ. Bible says He gives women over to the lusts for the unnatural acts towards women, and he gives men over to the lusts of their unnatural acts towards men. When we start to see sexuality come into question, we can't even have an agreeable argument or understanding over what a man is or what a woman is. That is because we are worshiping the creation and not the creator. These are the bigger questions that we have to get resolved in our heart. I wouldn't get caught up in all the questioning that was going on here on this program, not on excuse me, on the debate. But I would like you, I would encourage you to look a little bit bigger at what's going on and hopefully put to the test the things that are actually occurring and weigh those out. I don't know who's going to be the next president, but I am going to say this. When I put that vote in the box, it's not the person I'm believing in. It's my God whom I'm trusting. And just like it said in Psalm 67, and I'm going to pray to God, and He is the one who produces a benefit in a country. He is the one who guides the nations. He is the one that judges the nations. So when I put that vote in the box, I'm not voting for a person. I'm doing a democratic duty to put my belief system into that, knowing that my trust remains in the Lord and solidly so. So I want to encourage each one of you. Looking forward to the next time we gather together this next Wednesday at 4 p.m. on the challenge. Come and join me. And just as Joshua was exhorted by God to be strong and courageous, I'm going to encourage you to be the same. And at the end, God says to Joshua, Joshua says to the people after following God, he says this. He says, choose this day whom you will serve. And I encourage everybody to do exactly that. Every day you get up, choose this day whom you will serve. You're going to serve the politics. You're going to serve Biden. You're going to serve Trump. Are you going to serve Republicans? You're going to serve Democrats, or are you going to serve the Lord? But each day you must choose it. And I will declare to you every day of my life, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. God bless, and we'll see you next Wednesday.